Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The pianoforte's keys, slick and cold as river stones, greeted Julia's nervous touch. Chopin's nocturne spilled into the echoing hall. A cascade of notes that usually offered comfort, now only amplified the ache inside. Since the arrangement, the binding agreement, a constant shadow had fallen. Harding. The very syllable left a bitter taste. Her future name, Mrs. Harding. A clumsy chord shattered the melody, a jarring dissonance reflecting her inner turmoil. Frustration surged, a dark wave threatening to engulf her. The music was blameless. It was the luxurious prison closing around her, built of Cartwright wealth and rigid expectations. Each precise arpeggio felt like another shackle. The solid oak doors groaned open, and Julia's spine straightened instinctively. Framed in the entrance stood Jedediah Cartwright, his imposing presence casting a pall over the gleaming floor. Dressed, as always, in an impeccable dark suit that emphasized his powerful build and unwavering gaze, he commanded attention even in silence. "Julia," his voice resonated, a low thrum that vibrated through the air. No smile, no greeting beyond her name, signaling a purpose far beyond a casual visit. "The performance is sufficient. Sufficient." The highest praise she typically received a terse acknowledgement, cool and devoid of genuine pleasure. She lifted her aching fingers from the keys. "Thank you, Father." He entered the room, the sharp tap of his boots punctuating each step on the marble. He halted a few feet from the pianoforte, his piercing blue eyes, mirroring her own, locked on her. "The Hardings arrive next week," he declared, his tone absolute. "Everything must be flawless, utterly flawless." Julia's throat constricted. "I understand, Father." "Do you truly?" he pressed, his gaze relentless. "Do you grasp the gravity of this union? Its implications for this family, for the ranch?" She did. The Cartwrights desperately needed the Hardings' influence and financial support in the territory. Her marriage was the keystone, the sacrifice ensuring their prosperity. Her own happiness, however, was a separate consideration. "Yes, Father, I do." He scrutinized her, his expression unreadable. He had always viewed her as transparent, her emotions easily discerned, her minor acts of defiance swiftly quelled. Lately, though, she felt a burgeoning resistance, a force she herself struggled to comprehend. "Harding is a substantial man," he continued, his voice softening, almost pleading. "He offers stability, security. He will provide you with every possible material comfort. Everything except the essentials. Liberation, kinship, affection." The retort died on her tongue. Protest was pointless. His will was as immutable as the granite that ringed their property. "He is older," she offered cautiously, aware of the danger. Jedediah's eyes sharpened, a flicker of irritation igniting within their depths. "He is mature, Julia. He possesses experience, wisdom, qualities to be prized, not scorned." "But enough," he snapped, his patience exhausted. "Your duty lies with this family. Never forget that. Harding is an advantageous match, an exceptional one, and you will afford him every respect. You will be an obedient wife, and you will produce heirs to continue the Cartwright lineage. Is that clear?" Tears stung Julia's eyes, but she refused to release them. She wouldn't grant him that victory. She lowered her gaze, focusing on the woven intricacies of the rug beneath her feet. "Yes, father." A brief moment of softness flickered across his face, his hand reaching to brush her cheek in a rare gesture of tenderness that felt strangely alien. "I am doing this for your benefit, Julia," he murmured, his voice tinged with a semblance of compassion. "I want your happiness." Happiness? The word echoed hollowly, a cruel parody of the reality she faced. How could joy exist within a loveless bond, shackled to a stranger who viewed her as mere currency? He withdrew his hand as quickly as he extended it. His moment of warmth passed. "See that you recall that. I have matters to attend to. I expect you to be prepared upon the Hardings' arrival, and Julia, endeavor to smile. It suits you." He turned and left the room, his footsteps receding into the distance, leaving Julia isolated with her thoughts and her despair. The music remained silent, the pianoforte a somber monument to her confinement. She rose, her limbs heavy, weighted with dread. She drifted to the window, drawn to the vast landscape unfolding before her. The Cartwright ranch, a sprawling kingdom carved from untamed land by her grandfather's labor and grit. Undulating hills dotted with grazing herds, swaying fields of wheat shimmering gold in the breeze, and, in the distance, the serrated mountain peaks, their snow-capped summits blazing in the afternoon light. A glorious, commanding place, but not hers. She yearned to flee, to shatter the suffocating constraints holding her captive, to forge a life of meaning and passion. She visualized herself riding away, galloping across the plains, wind-whipped hair, sun-kissed skin, leaving behind stifling soirees, empty pleasantries, and vacant smiles. Finding a sanctuary where she could be authentic, breathe without restriction, and love freely. But it was only a mirage, a fleeting vision fading as swiftly as it appeared. She was Julia Cartwright, daughter of Jedediah Cartwright, and her fate was preordained, carved in stone by the expectations of her lineage and the rigid demands of society. She rested her forehead against the cold window pane, her breath clouding the glass. A solitary tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. Trapped, like a caged songbird, wings clipped, spirit crushed. But as despair threatened to consume her, a tiny ember of defiance ignited within her soul. She would not yield. She would not allow them to break her completely. She would discover a path, somehow, to reclaim her life, to seek her joy, even if it required challenging everything and everyone she had ever known. The seed of rebellion had been sown, and it would not be easily eradicated. The drifter's arrival spirals of dust devils whirled across the cracked earth, teasing at the edges of Luke Dawson's scuffed boots as he neared the Cartwright spread. Days on the trail had etched themselves into the topography of his face, a testament to sun and hardship. The ranch house, an opulent display of success, seemed to amplify the shabbiness of his clothes, the hollowness of his pockets. Readjusting his worn pack, he continued, driven by a yearning for honest work and a desperate flight from the specters that dogged his steps. The air, thick with the perfume of sage and the promise of a scorching day, greeted him as he reached the grand entrance. He paused, surveying the manicured grounds, the trim fences corralling sleek livestock, the dazzling reflection off pristine windows. This realm was a universe apart from the lean existence he understood. Steeling himself, he swung the gate open and began the walk to the main house. A young stable hand, barely past boyhood, regarded him with open distrust. "Hold up there." The boy's voice wavered. "State your purpose." "Looking for employment," Luke answered, his voice a gravelly rasp. Anything available. The boy's eyes swept over him, lingering on his toughened hands and the unyielding line of his jaw. Stay put, he instructed, retreating into the shadowed depths of the stables. Luke waited, the only sounds the distant bellows of cattle and the drone of insects. Then Jedediah Cartwright emerged from the house, an imposing figure that commanded attention. His face, a rigid landscape of authority, held no invitation. He moved with a resolute stride that silenced dissent. "You're seeking work?" Jedediah's voice resonated with a deep timbre. "Yes, sir," Luke replied, meeting his gaze squarely. "Name?" "Luke Dawson." "Experience?" "Ranching, primarily. Training horses, managing livestock, general upkeep." Jedediah circled him, his gaze a keen assessment. "I tolerate no trouble. This ranch is run with discipline." "I'm not looking for any trouble," Luke stated evenly. "Just a fair day's labor for a fair wage." Jedediah hesitated, weighing his options. Another pair of hands was needed, especially with Harding's imminent arrival, which would mean more labor. "Very well," he conceded. "I'll grant you a trial, but a single misstep and you're gone. Understood?" "Understood," Luke affirmed, relief flooding through him. "The bunkhouse is behind the stables. Settle in and report to Silas, the foreman, at first light." Jedediah turned to leave, then stopped. "And Dawson," he added, his voice a sharp edge. "I demand loyalty. To me and to this ranch. Nothing else holds value." Luke nodded, his expression guarded. "You have my word, Mr. Cartwright." As Jedediah returned to the house, Luke made his way towards the stables, the burden on his shoulders subtly eased. He located the bunkhouse, a plain, functional cabin furnished with simple cots. It was basic, but clean. Choosing a cot in the corner, he dropped his pack and stepped back outside. He drifted towards the edge of the yard, pulled by an unseen current. From that vantage, partially veiled by a stand of oak trees, he could see the main house, and on the veranda a figure stood, observing him. It was Julia, poised like a statue. Her dark hair captured the fading light, her pale dress a striking contrast against the veranda's shadows. She had watched the exchange between her father and the newcomer, her curiosity sparked by the man's quiet resolve and the weariness etched in his eyes. An aura about him, a vulnerability concealed beneath the rough exterior, intrigued her. She watched as he met her gaze across the distance. An unspoken connection passed between them, a silent acknowledgement. He held her stare for a fleeting moment, then turned away, disappearing into the dimness of the stables. Julia remained on the veranda, her pulse quickening, her mind reeling with unanswered questions. Who was this man, and what secrets did he harbor? Her life had been defined by her father's expectations, her future already meticulously planned. Yet, something about Luke Dawson kindled a yearning for something beyond the gilded cage of Cartwright privilege, a desire for self-determination, for a life untethered, and perhaps even for love. Later, as twilight deepened, painting the sky in fiery strokes of sunset, Luke found himself drawn back to the periphery of the yard. He leaned against the fence, watching the soft glow of lamps ignite within the main house. He knew he shouldn't linger, that his mere presence disturbed the established order. But he was powerless to resist. He felt an irresistible pull toward the house, toward the woman within. He caught a glimpse of her then, her silhouette briefly framed in a window. She was absorbed in a book, her brow creased in concentration. He envisioned her world, the luxuries she possessed, the obligations she faced. It was a world impossibly distant from his own, a world forever beyond his reach. He knew he must avoid her. He knew that any relationship between them would be forbidden, perilous. But as he stood in the gathering darkness, watching her from afar, he couldn't deny the burgeoning attraction, the magnetic force that drew him to her, a moth to a flame. He was a wanderer, a man devoid of possessions. Yet he was also a man capable of profound emotion, of unwavering loyalty, and of a love that could defy the most unyielding social barriers. And as he gazed upon Julia, he realized he was already succumbing, falling irrevocably, for the woman he could never possess. Stolen glances in the stables. The air in the stables was thick with the scent of hay and horse sweat, a familiar balm to Julia's restless spirit. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the weathered wood, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She brushed down Celeste, her favorite mare, a gentle giant with eyes the color of warm honey. The rhythm of the brush against Celeste's coat was soothing, a welcome distraction from the suffocating weight of expectation that had settled upon her shoulders since her father announced her betrothal to Mr. Abernathy. "Easy, girl," she murmured, running a hand down Celeste's velvety nose. The mare nuzzled her in response, a soft whicker escaping her throat. Julia leaned into the embrace, finding a solace she couldn't find in the grand drawing room of the Cartwright ranch. Out here, surrounded by the honest smells and sounds of the animals, she felt free, or at least a little less caged. She'd watched Luke yesterday, a silent observer, as her father, Jedediah, had interrogated him. Jedediah, usually booming and expansive, had been a coiled spring, his questions sharp and probing. Luke, in turn, had remained an enigma, his answers clipped, his gaze guarded. There was something about him, a quiet intensity, that both intrigued and unsettled her. He carried himself with the weary grace of a man who had seen too much, a man who had secrets etched into the lines around his eyes. Lost in thought, Julia reached for the saddle blanket, finding it just out of reach. "Here, let me get that for you." The voice was low and unexpected, sending a shiver down her spine. She turned to find Luke standing a few feet away, his shadowed eyes fixed on her. He moved with an economy of motion, reaching for the blanket with a casual grace that belied the strength in his hands. Their fingers brushed as he handed it to her, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of awareness through her. His skin was rough, calloused from labor, a stark contrast to her own soft hands. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. She busied herself with smoothing the blanket over Celeste's back, avoiding his gaze. The air between them crackled with an unspoken energy, a magnetic pull that both frightened and thrilled her. He didn't speak, simply watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The silence stretched, filled only by the rhythmic snorting of the horses and the distant call of a meadowlark. She could feel his presence, a heavy weight in the small space. "Are you settling in all right?" she asked, breaking the silence, the question feeling clumsy and inadequate. He leaned against a stall, his arms crossed over his chest, his posture relaxed but alert. "The work's honest," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That's all I ask." "My father can be demanding," she offered, her tone apologetic. "He expects a lot from his workers." A flicker of something that might have been amusement crossed his face. "I've met demanding men before, Miss Cartwright." The formality of his address felt like a deliberate barrier, a reminder of the chasm that separated them. "Please, call me Julia," she said, then immediately regretted her impulsiveness. He didn't respond, his expression unreadable. He simply stared at her, his eyes dark and intense. And for a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot who she was. It was as if they were the only two people in the world, caught in a silent dance of longing and forbidden desire. The spell was broken by the sharp crack of a whip outside the stables. Jedediah's voice boomed, calling for Luke. Luke straightened, pushing himself away from the stall. "Duty calls," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was more mocking than respectful. "Miss Julia!" He turned and walked away, his movements fluid and purposeful. Julia watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. The stables suddenly felt cold and empty, the air devoid of the electricity that had crackled between them. She finished saddling Celeste, her hands trembling slightly. As she led the mare out of the stables, she caught Luke's eye. He was standing near the corral, talking to her father. Jedediah was gesturing emphatically, his face flushed with anger. Luke stood impassively, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Their eyes met across the distance, a fleeting connection in the midst of the chaos. There was something in his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken feelings that hung between them. It was a dangerous game they were playing, a game that could have devastating consequences. But as Julia swung herself onto Celeste's back and urged the mare into a canter, she knew she couldn't resist the pull, the forbidden allure of Luke Dawson. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying with it the scent of hay and horse sweat, and the faint, intoxicating aroma of danger. She glanced back one last time and saw Luke still watching her, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. His gaze burned into her, a promise and a warning, a silent declaration of a desire that could never be fulfilled, or perhaps a desire that was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The arrival of Mr. Harding, a plume of dust, heralded his arrival long before the polished gleam of the carriage resolved on the horizon. It was an absurd spectacle, a floating palace of dark wood and gaudy ornamentation, jarring against the Cartwright ranch's rugged simplicity. Julia watched from the porch shadows, nausea twisting in her gut like a wrung cloth. Beside her, Jedediah stood rigidly, a hard-won satisfaction carved into his weathered features. The carriage drew to a halt with a flourish, its matched blacks restless, eager to shed their opulent burden. A footman, stiff in livery, sprang to open the door, revealing Clarence Harding in all his pompous glory. He emerged with measured slowness, adjusting the cut of his bespoke suit, as ill-suited to the ranch as his outlandish transport. His gaze swept the property with cool appraisal before settling on Julia, a hungry glint in his eye. "Julia, darling," he purred, his voice sickeningly saccharine. He advanced, a smile stretched thinly across his face, never reaching the chill depths of his eyes. "You look robust, all things considered." Julia fought the urge to flinch. "Mr. Harding?" she offered, her tone carefully even. She extended a hand. His grip was possessive, the pressure lingering too long. "Clarence, please," he corrected, his smile widening, a touch too broad. "We're practically family." He turned to Jedediah, clapping him on the shoulder with a forced heartiness. "Cartwright, good to see you. The journey was an experience. Your roads, shall we say, lack refinement." His words trailed off, his nose wrinkling in distaste. Jedediah merely grunted, unfazed by Harding's complaints. "The ranch serves its purpose. Function over flourish." He gestured toward the house. "Come inside. You must be bone dry." As they moved, Harding kept Julia anchored to his side, his hand a brand on her arm. She felt the weight of his expectations, the oppressive pressure of his claim. Inside, the house seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy with Harding's overbearing presence. He scrutinized the parlor with open disdain, his gaze lingering on the threadbare furnishings and faded wallpaper. "Picturesque," he offered, the word dripping with condescension. "It's home," Julia retorted, unable to mask the edge in her voice. Harding chuckled, a low, grating sound. "Naturally. And soon, my dear, you'll have a proper home, in the city, with every comfort imaginable." Julia remained silent, her quietude a subtle act of defiance, refusing to let him absorb her into his gilded vision. She stole a glance out the window, her gaze drawn to the distant stables. She wondered if Luke was there, tending the horses, unaware of the gilded cage about to slam shut around her. Her father cleared his throat, the sound like a gunshot in the strained air. "Harding's here to familiarize himself with the ranch, Julia. Show him around. He is, after all, making an investment." The word investment hung in the air, a stark acknowledgment of the mercenary underpinnings of their arrangement. She was a commodity, a transaction, her value measured in acreage and dividends. Harding beamed, his teeth flashing. "Indeed, a tour would be most welcome. I am eager to see where my capital is being deployed." He squeezed Julia's arm, a bruising grip. "Shall we, my dear?" Suppressing a shudder, Julia led him outside. The afternoon sun beat relentlessly, throwing into sharp relief the contrast between Harding's immaculate appearance and the unyielding landscape. He picked his way through the terrain with a prissy gait, assiduously avoiding any speck of dirt, his discomfort palpable. "So," he started, his voice tight, "tell me about this ranch. What precisely does it yield?" Julia outlined the fundamentals of cattle ranching, her tone devoid of inflection. Harding listened with thinly veiled boredom, peppering her with questions that betrayed both his ignorance and lack of genuine interest. His focus seemed entirely on the property's dimensions and projected profits, rather than the labor involved. As they approached the corral, Julia spotted Luke leaning against the fence, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on them with an unreadable mixture of defiance and resignation. A jolt of raw awareness shot through her, highlighting the forbidden connection between them. Oblivious, Harding halted abruptly. "Who is that?" he snapped, his tone sharp and accusatory, pointing at Luke with his ebony cane. "That's Luke," Julia replied, her voice carefully controlled. "He works here. He looks here. He looks subordinate. I don't like the way he's looking at you." Julia's hackles rose. "He's simply doing his job." Harding's eyes narrowed to slits. "I don't like him. I want him gone." Before Julia could form a response, her father's voice thundered from behind them. "Harding? Something you wanted to inspect in the barn?" Jedediah's tone left no room for argument, and Harding, sensing the subtle shift in power, followed him toward the barn with ill grace, casting one last, venomous glance in Luke's direction. Julia watched them depart, her heart hammering. Harding's arrival had irrevocably altered the landscape. The precarious equilibrium she had maintained was shattered, replaced by a looming sense of foreboding. She moved toward the corral, drawn to Luke like iron to a lodestone. As she neared, Luke straightened, his expression guarded. "Miss Julia," he acknowledged, his voice low and gravelly. "Luke," she replied, her voice barely audible. They stood in silence, the unspoken tension between them thick enough to cut. From the barn's shadows, Julia could feel Harding's unseen eyes boring into them. "He doesn't care for me," Luke stated, his voice matter-of-fact. "No," Julia agreed, He does not. He'll try to run me off. I know. Luke met her gaze, his eyes intense. What will you do? Julia hesitated. She knew what she should do. Accept her prescribed fate, marry Harding, and embrace the life that was expected of her. But the prospect choked her with despair. I don't know, she confessed, her voice trembling. I don't know. Luke reached out, his fingertips grazing hers. The fleeting contact sent a shockwave through her. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading for something she couldn't name. Be careful, Miss Julia, he cautioned, his voice laced with warning. He's a dangerous man. Julia nodded, her heart aching with a dull throb. She knew his words were true, but she also knew she was irrevocably drawn to him, to his quiet strength, his inherent dignity, his unwavering presence. And she knew she was willing to risk it all for a chance at something genuine, something real. Later that evening, during dinner, Harding held court, regaling Jedediah with exaggerated tales of his business triumphs and social connections. Julia sat in silence, toying with her food, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She glanced at her father, his face an inscrutable mask, his eyes fixed on Harding. She wondered if he had any inkling of the storm raging within her. Harding reached across the table, clasping her hand in a possessive grip, his eyes gleaming with premature triumph. Soon, my dear. He oozed with false affection. You'll be all mine. Julia met his gaze, her eyes hardening with a defiance she could no longer contain. I wouldn't be so certain of that, Mr. Harding, she stated, her voice clear and unwavering. The room fell silent, the clatter of silverware ceasing. Jedediah turned to her, his eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. Harding's smile flickered, momentarily displaced by a flicker of uncertainty. What do you mean? He pressed, his voice suddenly tight. Julia held his gaze, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. I mean, she declared, that I haven't made a final decision. The heavens unleashed a torrential downpour, transforming the Cartwright ranch into a slick expanse of mud and reflected light. Jagged lightning split the sky, followed by booming thunder that resonated through the very foundations of the house. From the parlor window, Julia watched the tempestuous weather, a mirror to the unease churning inside her. Clarence Harding's presence in the guest room felt like a stifling burden on her already constrained existence. A flash illuminated the barn, stark against the enveloping gloom, almost instantly followed by a deafening clap that shook the valley. Julia inhaled sharply, a cold finger of apprehension tracing her spine. She found her father in his study, absorbed in his accounts, seemingly oblivious to the raging elements, or perhaps choosing willful ignorance. Father, she began, her voice struggling against the storm's fury. I believe lightning struck close to the barn. Jedediah Cartwright looked up, his brow creased with annoyance. Nonsense, Julia. This house has weathered far worse through the years. Yet, a fleeting shadow of concern flickered in his eyes. Despite his dismissive words, he cherished his livestock nearly as much as the land itself. Another concussive blast rattled the panes, this time impossible for even Jedediah to ignore. He pushed back his chair with a deliberate scrape. I'll take a look. See to Harding's needs. As he braved the elements, Julia remained transfixed by the window, a knot tightening in her stomach. It was more than just the barn. It was Belle, her cherished mare, a creature of vibrant energy with a coat the hue of burnished copper, was sheltered there. An inexplicable premonition, sharp and insistent, seized her. The minutes stretched, each one punctuated by blinding flashes and the incessant drumming of rain. Then, she noticed it an orange glow, flickering against the inky canvas of the storm. Acrid smoke began to plume from the barn's roof. Fire! The word escaped her in a choked whisper. Without hesitation, she snatched her shawl and dashed out into the wind-whipped rain. What awaited her was a scene of utter chaos. The barn was engulfed, greedy flames devouring the dry timbers, casting grotesque, dancing shadows in the deluge. Ranch hands, their faces grim, desperately hurled buckets of water at the blaze, their efforts proving futile against the ravenous inferno. Her father stood back, shouting commands, his face a mask of frustration and helplessness. "Belle!" Julia cried, her voice swallowed by the storm's roar and the fire's crackle. "She's in there!" A ranch hand seized her arm. "Miss Julia, you can't go near. It's far too dangerous." But Julia shook him off, her gaze locked on the conflagration. Belle was trapped, and she couldn't stand idly by. Just as she was about to plunge into the smoke-filled structure, a figure materialized from the shadows, moving with a quiet resolve that sliced through the turmoil. It was Luke, already halfway to the barn, his face smudged with soot, his movements swift and determined. He offered no words, no glance in her direction, yet his presence was a source of hope amidst the encroaching despair. Julia watched, her heart a frantic drum, against her ribs. As Luke vanished into the burning building, the heat radiated intensely, the smoke a suffocating blanket. Each second felt like an eternity, each snap of the fire a hammer blow to her spirit. She strained to see, desperate for a sign, some indication that he still lived. Her father, noticing her anguish, drew near, his expression softened with concern. "He's a fool, Julia, a reckless fool." "He's trying to save Belle," Julia shot back, her voice wavering with fear and defiance. She refused to believe Luke would fail. She had glimpsed a quiet strength in his eyes, a profound courage that belied his unassuming nature. The following moments were a torturous blur. The barn groaned under the fire's relentless assault, threatening imminent collapse. Just when Julia felt she could bear no more, a figure emerged from the inferno, silhouetted against the blazing backdrop. It was Luke, leading Belle. The mare coughed, her coat scorched, her eyes wide with panic, but alive. Luke's face was blackened, his clothes clock, smoldering. Yet his grip on the lead rope remained firm. He guided her from the barn, away from the flames, into the relative sanctuary of the rain-lashed yard. Reaching safety, Belle bolted from Luke's hold and raced to Julia, nudging her shoulder. Julia embraced the mare, burying her face in her singed coat, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her cheeks. Luke stood nearby, his chest rising and falling heavily, his face etched with exhaustion. He met Julia's gaze, his eyes holding a quiet intensity that sent a tremor through her. He had risked everything to save her horse, and in doing so, had rescued something within her as well. Jedediah Cartwright approached, his face a study in relief and grudging respect. "Dawson," he said, his voice rough, "you've got more backbone than I thought. You've earned yourself a permanent place on this ranch." Luke merely nodded, his attention still fixed on Julia. He seemed indifferent to the offer, the praise, everything but her well-being. In that instant, Julia realized her life had shifted irrevocably. The storm had brought destruction and fire, yet it had also illuminated a truth she could no longer deny. She felt drawn to Luke, to his unspoken strength and steadfast bravery, in a way that defied all reason. And she knew, with an unwavering certainty, that their paths were now bound together, destined to intertwine in ways that would challenge everything she had once believed. A tender moment, the reek of smoke permeated everything, a grim testament to the averted disaster. Julia discovered Luke by the water trough, dousing his face. Soaked dark hair clung to his brow, exposing a livid scrape along his temple. Guilt churned inside her. He'd risked everything for Belle, for her sake. Luke, her voice nearly lost amid the horse's anxious whinnies in the corral. Lifting his head, bloodshot eyes softened at the sight of her. He straightened, a subtle grimace betraying his hidden pain. "Miss Julia, are you unharmed?" She approached, ignoring the mud that tugged at her skirt's hem. "I should be asking you that. Let me see." With a moment's hesitation, he allowed her to gently angle his face into the fading light. The burn pulsed red, yet thankfully wasn't profound. "This requires proper cleaning," she said, fingertips feathering against his skin. An unexpected surge, sharp and bright, zipped through her. She recoiled. "It's nothing," he mumbled, averting his gaze. "It's anything but. You saved Belle. Everything." Her voice shook slightly, the ordeal having rattled her more than she'd admit. The image of him vanishing into the blaze ran on repeat in her mind. A terrifying loop. She guided him toward the wash house, a small stone outbuilding near the main house. Inside, she soaked a clean cloth in cool water and began to blot the injury. He flinched, remaining still beneath her touch. The tiny room vibrated with unspoken emotion, thick with a palpable tension. "Thank you," he finally rasped, voice deepened by exhaustion. "For everything." Julia looked up, their eyes locking. Raw honesty shone in his gaze, stealing her breath. She saw not only gratitude, but something deeper, mirroring the storm within her own heart. The rigid cast of his features, typically guarded, had softened under the weight of shared trauma. I'm at a loss," she confessed, her voice a breath. He reached out, his rough hand covering hers where it rested on his cheek. The warmth shot through her like a jolt of electricity. "Don't say anything," he murmured, his eyes seeking hers, a silent question posed. She knew, with unwavering claw, certainty, that he recognized it too, this improbable, undeniable connection simmering between them since their first meeting. "Luke," she breathed, a plea on her lips. He leaned closer, his face a breath away. She felt the warmth of his exhale on her skin. Inhaled the lingering scent of smoke mingled with his own unique musk. "I shouldn't," he whispered, conflict roughening his tone. "I can't." I know, she whispered back, "but I don't care." And in that moment, every restriction, every expectation, every carefully crafted defense she had erected around her emotions shattered. She was no longer Julia Cartwright, the dutiful daughter, the compliant fiancée. She was simply Julia, a woman drawn to a man she could never possess, yet couldn't resist. He framed her face, thumbs tracing the delicate bones. Longing and despair warred in his eyes. "You deserve so much more than I can offer." "I don't want more," she insisted, searching his gaze. "I just want you." He closed the distance. Their lips met, a kiss both tender and desperate. A kiss born of longing, of stolen glances, of unvoiced desires. A kiss that tasted of smoke and forbidden promises. A kiss that fractured the fragile illusion of her carefully managed existence. She responded with a fervor that astonished her. Her hands tangled in his hair, urging him closer. She registered the heat of his body against hers, the lean strength of his chest, the reassuring grip of his arms. For a fleeting, glorious moment, all else ceased to exist. The fire, her father, her fiancé, societal expectations all dissolved into nothingness. There was only Luke and the inexorable magnetic pull between them. The kiss deepened, growing urgent, demanding. Exhilaration surged through her. Liberation. This was the sensation of being truly alive, truly unburdened. But the moment was destined to shatter. The distant timbre of her father's voice, calling her name, sliced through their private bubble. Reality descended, harsh and unwelcome. They broke apart, gasping, eyes wide with a mix of guilt and fear. "Julia!" Her father's voice was closer, laced with impatience. Panic clenched her chest. She couldn't be discovered like this. It would ruin everything. "I have to go," she breathed, her voice a tremor. Luke nodded, his face ashen. He raked a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with regret. "Go. I'll manage here." She longed to stay, to luxuriate in his warmth, to pretend for a few stolen moments that a life together was possible. But the repercussions were too dire. She reached out, grazing his cheek one last time. "Thank you, Luke." Then, burdened, she turned and fled, leaving him solitary in the small wash-house. The phantom of their kiss lingering. Hurrying back toward the house, her father's voice grew louder, more insistent. Drawing a deep breath, she forced herself to compose her features, to reassume the mantle of Julia Cartwright, the dutiful daughter. But a war raged within between obligation and yearning, between the life prescribed and the life desperately desired, and with a chilling certainty, she knew the battle had merely begun. Luke watched her retreat, his heart heavy. He knew this could never truly be, that their lives diverged too greatly, their stations too distant. Yet he couldn't deny the seed of affection that had taken root in his soul. Julia Cartwright was a forbidden fantasy, a star eternally beyond his grasp. Even so, he found himself unable to simply relinquish her. He suspected, with a sense of inevitability, that this was far from a conclusion. A father's warning, the lingering aroma of wood smoke clung to Luke's shirt, a somber echo of the previous night's turmoil as he forked hay in the dim stable. Belle's recovery was slow going, and the Cartwrights were undoubtedly beholden to him, though that debt felt precariously balanced, like a teetering stack of coins. He sensed eyes on him, a prickling awareness that transcended mere observation. He paused, wiping his brow with a swipe of his forearm. Jedediah Cartwright filled the stable entrance, sunlight etching him in stark relief. His expression offered no welcome. The man's habitual booming resonance was muted, his features an inscrutable mask. A silver-topped riding crop swung gently from his grip, its polished surface catching the light in fleeting flashes. "Dawson," Jedediah's voice rumbled, pitched low. "My study. Now." Luke's stomach tightened into a knot. He dropped the shovel with a clatter and trailed Cartwright toward the main house, the rhythmic tap-tap of the riding crop against leather boots the sole accompaniment to their procession. Inside, a cool stillness prevailed, a stark contrast to the vibrant ranch life outside. Jedediah motioned him into the study, a sanctuary of heavy oak, morocco-bound volumes, and the rich, heady fragrance of pipe tobacco. Though the morning was mild, a fire whispered in the hearth. Circling his imposing desk, Jedediah fixed Luke with a steady gaze. No offer of a seat came. "Last night, you displayed valor, saved my daughter's horse. For that, ungrateful." Luke gave a curt nod, unsure how to respond. "Anyone would have done the same, sir." Jedediah's lips thinned. "Perhaps. But Not everyone could have. You exhibited mettle. He paused, his gaze sharpening. However, such fortitude is a blade that cuts both ways, Dawson. It can inspire actions that overreach. Unease prickled at Luke's skin as he shifted his weight. I'm not sure I grasp. Your meaning, sir. Let me be plain then, Jedediah stated, his tone hardening. He leaned forward, planting his hands firmly on the desktop. My daughter, Julia, is promised to a man of considerable stature, one who can provide her with the security she merits. Luke remained silent, jaw tight. The trajectory of this conversation was sickeningly predictable. You, on the other hand, Jedediah continued, his voice dripping with condescension, are a transient, a hired hand, a passerby. You offer her nothing, absolutely nothing. The words, like stinging nettles, stung more deeply than he anticipated. He locked eyes with Jedediah, refusing to yield. I've made no such claim, sir. A spark of anger ignited in Jedediah's eyes. Then you comprehend the situation. Any inclination you might harbor toward my daughter is inappropriate, unacceptable. He rose abruptly, towering over Luke. Am I understood, Dawson? Crystal, Luke replied, his voice betraying none of the tumult within. Good, Jedediah replied, the rasp in his voice telling that the steel remained beneath. He drifted over to gaze towards the window, overlooking his vast terrain. I pride myself on fairness, Dawson. I acknowledge debts. You saved Belle, an event that warrants recompense. Turning back, a calculating glint shone in his eyes. I am prepared to extend to you a permanent position on this ranch, a respectable wage, adequate living space. You would be settled for life. Luke stared, dumbstruck. He had braced himself for fury, threats, perhaps even physical confrontation. This was unforeseen. Permanent employment? And, indeed, Jedediah affirmed, watching him intently, a golden opportunity for a man of your background. A chance for stability, for advancement. All I require in exchange is discretion, that you maintain a respectful distance from my daughter, that you understand your place within this household. The proposition dangled, both tempting and abhorrent, a chance to shed his past, to establish roots, but at what sacrifice? And should I decline your offer, sir? Jedediah's smile evaporated, replaced by an icy stare. Then you will be back on the open road, Dawson, searching for employment. And I assure you, securing a position in this region will prove challenging. Exceptionally so. He raised the riding crop and tapped it against his thigh. The sharp crack resonated in the quiet room. News spreads swiftly, you see, particularly when it originates from someone of my standing. The subtext, a chilling threat, hung heavy in the air. Luke understood perfectly. He was cornered. He could embrace Jedediah's offer and accept a comfortable, albeit soul-crushing, existence. Or he could reject it and face the inevitable repercussions. In either scenario, Julia remained unattainable. I require time to deliberate, sir, Luke managed, his voice strained. Jedediah offered a slow nod. Naturally. Take the time you require. However, do not linger too long, Dawson. Opportunities of this caliber are rare. He gestured toward the exit. You are dismissed. Luke turned and exited the study, the weight of Jedediah's words like stones in his pockets. Stepping back into the sunlight, the world seemed to have lost its brightness. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that his decision was not his to make alone. Jedediah had ensured that. He cast a look back at the house. focusing on the window of Jedediah's study. He pictured Julia inside, blissfully unaware of the bargain being negotiated on her behalf. His fists clenched, a surge of rage and helplessness coursing through him. He was forbidden, and she was promised. The chasm between them yawned wider than ever. A life of promise was offered, though it was tainted with the notion that acceptance meant giving any hope of joy. As he made way back towards the stalls, the memory of Julia's face smoldered into his vision. He had a decision to make, and it would determine the coming future. And he knew, in the depth of his heart, that someone would suffer pain regardless. Confined by duty, the scent of dust and leather still clung to Julia as she hurried towards her father's study. The image of Luke's downcast eyes burned into her mind. She'd witnessed the tail end of their conversation near the stables, the heavy silence that followed speaking volumes despite the distance. Jedediah's back had been quiet, rigid. A familiar posture she knew meant he was laying down the law. She found him behind his massive mahogany desk, a half-empty glass of whiskey sweating in his hand. The lamplight cast harsh shadows on his face, etching deeper lines around his mouth, making him seem older, harder. "Father," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to talk to you." Jedediah sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured bellows. "Julia, I haven't got time for girlish whims. Preston arrives tomorrow, and there are arrangements to be finalized." He gestured impatiently with his glass, the amber liquid swirling. "This isn't a whim," she insisted, stepping further into the room. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound that echoed the closing of her own options. "It's about my life, about my happiness." He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Happiness? Happiness is security, Julia. It's knowing you'll never want for anything. Preston can provide that. Love is a luxury, a fleeting fancy. Security is forever." Julia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "But I don't love him, Father. I barely even know him. He sees me as a possession, a trophy to display, not a person." Jedediah stood up, his height dwarfing her. He walked around the desk, his gaze intense. "Don't be dramatic. Preston is a fine man, from a fine family. This marriage will solidify our position. Julia, it will secure the Cartwright legacy for generations to come. Do you understand the importance of that?" She understood perfectly. She understood that she was a pawn, a means to an end. "And what about what I want?" she asked, her voice rising in desperation. "Don't I have any say in my own future? Your future is intertwined with mine, Julia. What benefits me benefits you. You'll have a grand house, beautiful clothes, servants catering to your every whim. What more could a woman want?" He reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You'll learn to care for him. You'll be a good wife, and you'll give me grandchildren. That's your duty, Julia." The word duty hung in the air, a heavy shackle binding her to a life she didn't choose. She tried to pull her hand away, but his grip tightened. "But I don't want any of that if it means being unhappy," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, Father, please reconsider. There has to be another way." Jedediah's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained firm. "There is no other way, Julia. This is for the best. Trust me. I know what I'm doing." He released her hand and turned back to the desk, effectively dismissing her. "Now, I suggest you go and prepare yourself for Preston's arrival. Put on a smile, Julia. It's expected of you." She stood there for a moment, paralyzed by a wave of despair. The walls of the study seemed to be closing in on her, suffocating her. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to break free from the gilded cage her father had built around her. But she knew it was futile. Arguing with him was like arguing with a mountain unyielding, immovable. "Is that all?" Jedediah asked, not even turning around. Julia swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. "Yes, Father," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She turned and walked towards the door, her steps heavy and defeated. As she reached the threshold, she paused, a flicker of defiance igniting within her. "But I won't promise to smile," she said, her voice stronger this time. Then she left the study, leaving Jedediah alone with his whiskey and his ambitions. Back in her room, Julia sank onto the velvet chaise lounge, the soft fabric doing little to ease her discomfort. The elaborate decorations, the expensive furnishings, all seemed meaningless now. They were just symbols of her gilded prison, reminders of the life she was expected to lead. She looked out the window, across the vast expanse of the ranch. She could see the distant figures of cowboys tending to the cattle, their lives seemingly simple and free. Her gaze drifted towards the stables, towards the spot where she had seen Luke. A memory flashed through her mind. His strong hands gently tending to Belle's injured leg, the quiet intensity in his eyes when he looked at her. A forbidden warmth spread through her chest. He saw her, really saw her, not as Jedediah Cartwright's daughter, not as Preston's future wife, but as Julia. She knew it was foolish, dangerous even, to think of him. But she couldn't help it. He was a spark of hope in the suffocating darkness of her arranged marriage. He represented a life she could never have, a life of freedom and genuine connection. Tears, finally, streamed down her face, silent tears of frustration and despair. She was trapped, confined by duty, by her father's ambition, by the expectations of society. But somewhere deep inside, a small ember of rebellion still flickered, and she knew, with a growing certainty, that she couldn't simply accept her fate without a fight. Whispers of the past, the reek of hay and equine musk, clung to Luke as he rested against the corral, watching the Cartwright's horses blur in the twilight. Julia's face, a canvas of carefully concealed sorrow, haunted his thoughts. Logic dictated he remain distant. She was promised. Yet, an echo of her spirit resonated within him, a silent cry he felt compelled to answer. Pushing off the fence, the rough-hewn wood grated against his denim. He needed to find some solace, some way to quell the memories that surged up when he dared to consider her. He turned toward the bunkhouse, the sinking sun painting long. Grotesque figures that mimicked him. The crunch of his boots upon the parched earth was a solitary rhythm against the rising chorus of crickets. He halted, a phantom image assaulting his mind. A different sunset, an earlier life. He was a boy, really, his face unburdened, his eyes bright. He recalled fields of ripening wheat, the warmth of the sun on his face, Sarah's laughter as she and Lily played amongst the stalks. Lily, a sun-kissed cherub with hair like spun moonlight. He could almost feel her small hand nestled in his as they ambled back to their modest farmhouse, the air promising an abundant harvest. Then the vision twisted. Gold bled into crimson. Laughter dissolved into a roar. A cyclone, a malevolent entity birthed from a serene sky, descended upon their farm with unimaginable fury. He remembered clutching Lily, his body a shield against the tempest. Sarah's scream tearing through the wind. The world became a maelstrom of debris, a swirling vortex of splintered hope. He clung to Lily, but the storm was insatiable. She was torn from his embrace, swallowed by the vortex. He discovered her later amongst the wreckage, her luminous hair entangled with mud and broken stalks. Sarah never recovered. The light within her flickered and died, leaving behind only a hollow ache. She faded, a frail bloom crushed by grief's weight, succumbing to fever months later. He was adrift, lost in a sea of desolation, the weight of his sorrow threatening to drown him. The bunkhouse now felt like a suffocating box, the air stale and heavy. He raked his fingers through his hair, the memory still festering, the pain still sharp. He had divested himself of the remains of the farm, unable to endure the haunting echoes of his shattered existence. Drifted, taking transient jobs, avoiding any place for long. He became adept at repression, building ramparts around his heart, dodging any connection that might breed more pain. He recognized the haunted look mirrored in Quate, Julia's gaze. The same profound solitude he knew intimately. He saw the yearning, the unspoken plea for freedom. He wanted to offer her comfort, but knew he mustn't. He was a fractured man, burdened by an unshareable sorrow. He would only inflict more suffering. He pushed through the door of the bunkhouse, the aroma of stale tobacco and sweat stinging his nostrils. The other hands were gathered around a table, a game of tad. Cards underway, their faces lit by the flickering kerosene lamp. He nodded a silent greeting and slunk towards his bunk, the bottom one in the corner, a haven of solitude in the crowded space. He stared up at the rough ceiling. The ghosts of yesterday whispered in his ear, a relentless reminder of his losses. He closed his eyes, willing sleep to come, to provide escape from his torment. But Julia's face remained, her eyes filled with a yearning that echoed his own, a constant reminder of the impossible predicament. He knew proximity was dangerous, but the thought of her facing her own storm alone was unbearable. He was ensnared, caught between his past and her future, imprisoned by his own history. He tossed, the weight of his decision pressing down, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, until they consumed everything. He knew, with killing certainty, that whatever he decided, someone would suffer. He had a bad premonition. It would be Julia. He blew out the lamp, plunging the bunkhouse into darkness. He prayed for oblivion, but knew none would come. He was a marked man, and she, too, now bore the brand. Stolen moments under the stars, a crescent moon, a fragile gleam in the velvet night, conspired in their clandestine affair. Julia, her pulse a frantic drum against her collarbone, stole away from the grand house. The silken gown, meant to impress, felt like the chains of her privileged confinement. She moved like a phantom across the manicured lawn, avoiding her mother's prized roses. Another tryst with Luke. Each secret meeting was a perilous gamble, a tightrope walk above exposure. Yet the anticipation of his presence, the warmth of his regard, was an irresistible lure. He waited by the ancient oak, a silent guardian at the edge of the Cartwright estate, where tended grounds surrendered to the wild prairie. Against the star-dusted expanse, he was a stark silhouette, an enigmatic figure that stirred both unease and a thrilling curiosity. Luke offered no greeting, only a nod, his gaze, usually guarded, now softened with an inner fire mirroring her own hidden desires. The air buzzed with unspoken sentiments, a yearning that defied the rigid walls between their lives. "I shouldn't be here," Julia breathed, her words lost in the cricket's chorus. Luke closed the distance, moonlight illuminating the strong lines of his face, accentuating the weariness etched around his eyes. "Nor should I should," he rumbled, the sound resonating deep within her. Yet they were both there, bound by a force eclipsing duty, transcending fear. Beneath the oak, The rough bark provided a coarse contrast to the smooth fabric of her dress. A comfortable, intimate hush settled between them. "Tell me about the stars," Julia finally requested, breaking the spell. "What do you see when you look up at them?" Luke lifted his gaze, lost in the celestial artwork above. "I see sagas," he began, his voice a shade softer, revealing a vulnerability he typically concealed. Tales of voyages, of absence, of hope reborn. Every star, a life, a world, a possibility. He indicated a faint shimmer in the distance. "The Pleiades. Legend says they are the 7 daughters of Atlas, eternally pursued by Orion. Forever running, forever hunted." A shiver traced Julia's spine, the myth striking a chord within her. Was she, too, in flight, escaping the life predestined for her, a gilded cage masquerading as destiny? "And you, Julia?" Luke inquired, turning his gaze upon her. "What stories do you find?" Hesitation held her captive, the weight of her secrets heavy on her tongue. "I see a life imposed upon me," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "A path charted before I had a voice. A life where my happiness seems irrelevant." Luke's hand reached for hers, his touch sending a shockwave through her, a forbidden thrill that both terrified and exhilarated. "You deserve joy, Julia," he insisted, his voice imbued with resolute conviction. "Everyone does." She studied him, truly seeing beyond the rugged appearance, the haunted depths of his eyes, the quiet reserve. She perceived a man familiar with suffering, burdened by loss, yet possessing an unwavering integrity and a boundless empathy. "Do you believe it's possible," she whispered, "to reshape one's fate?" Luke's grip tightened, a silent reassurance. "I believe in the realm of possibility," he declared, "provided you're willing to fight for it." They spoke for hours, exchanging fragments of their pasts, unveiling long-dormant dreams. Julia confided her thwarted ambitions, her yearning to explore, to create art, to live authentically. Luke recounted his family, lost to the cyclone, the lingering guilt that haunted his waking hours. Every shared confidence forged a stronger link, reinforcing the illicit connection burgeoning between them. As the moon began its descent, painting long shadows across the prairie, Luke rose and gently drew Julia to her feet. "It's time," he said, a note of regret coloring his voice. "You must return." Julia nodded, acknowledging the truth, yet reluctant to sever the moment. She reached out, her fingertips tracing the contours of his jawline. "Thank you, Luke," she murmured, "for listening, for understanding." He captured her hand, his gaze intense. "I will always listen, Julia," he promised. "Always?" He then leaned forward, his lips barely grazing hers. A tentative kiss, a fleeting caress, yet it unleashed a wave of heat, igniting a consuming flame. She closed her eyes, succumbing to the moment, oblivious to everything but the sensation of his mouth upon hers. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent, more desperate. A kiss born of longing, of stolen moments, of a love defying the boundaries of their disparate worlds. They parted, breathless, their gazes locked. An unspoken promise hung in the air, a hazardous, intoxicating pact. "Julia," Luke breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I?" But approaching voices fractured the spell. Julia gasped, fear widening her eyes. "Someone's coming," she warned, pulling away. "I have to go." She spun and fled, vanishing into the shadows, leaving Luke standing solitary beneath the oak, the taste of her lingering on his lips, the echo of her laughter resonating in his memory. He knew the game he was playing was fraught with peril, that their clandestine meetings could have devastating consequences, yet he found himself powerless to resist her allure. Julia was a guiding star in the encroaching darkness, a beacon to which he was irresistibly drawn, despite the danger. He could only hope their stolen moments beneath the stars would not precipitate their ruin. Suspicion and jealousy from the guest room window. Clarence Harding spied on Julia, Amber's spirits sloshing in his glass. He pleaded a bogus headache to duck out of dinner, an ache fueled more by Julia's growing detachment than any real malady. Cartwright estate, usually a balm to his soul, now felt like an opulent trap, confining him with a woman drifting beyond his reach. Across the immaculate lawn, she stood a slender dark shape against the dying day, near the stables, apparently deep in colloquy with Dawson. Harding's fingers tightened around the tumbler. The ranch hand's presence hadn't escaped his notice, the quiet mastery he showed with the horses. How he seemed to intuit Julia's unspoken wants. Dismissed as mere competence before, now a prickling unease invaded Harding's gut. Julia regarded the man with a certain softness, a vulnerability previously unseen, certainly never directed his way. A ghost of a smile touched her lips as she listened, her head inclined as if each word held immense significance. The sight ignited a spark of envy, a possessive fury threatening to consume him. He drained the whiskey in a gulp, the fiery liquid doing little to douse the rising suspicions. The glass hit the bedside table with a sharp report, the sound magnified in the stillness. He needed answers. He needed certainty. Later, finding Julia in the library, after she had ostensibly retired for the evening, he noted she was clearly lost in thought. He closed the door with a muted click, and she started. "Clarence," she murmured, her tone a little too cheerful. "I didn't hear you." He offered a practiced, charming smile, though his eyes remained keen, probing. "Just checking on my almost wife. Are you quite well, my dear? You seem distracted of late." Julia equivocated, her gaze skittering away. "Perfectly fine, Clarence. Just weary, I think. The wedding plans are rather demanding." He closed the space between them, a subtle invasion. He took her hand, his grip firm, verging on claiming. "Is weariness all that separates us? Because I sense a chill, a growing distance. As our wedding approaches, the more reserved you become." He scrutinized her, hunting for any hint of falsehood in her expression. He'd always taken pride in his ability to decipher people, to penetrate their facades. But lately, reading Julia felt like grappling with a foreign tongue. "Of course not, Clarence," she said, her voice tight. "I'm merely overwhelmed. I assure you, nothing has altered." The words, however, lacked conviction. Harding's pressure on her hand increased. "Tell me truly, Julia, are you happy?" The loaded question hung between them, heavy with unspoken anxieties and veiled accusations. Her extended silence was broken only by the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. At last she met his stare, her expression an inscrutable mask. "Indeed, Clarence, I am blessed." He dissected her face, desperately seeking the truth he wished to embrace. But all he found was a carefully constructed deception, shielding the turmoil underneath. Releasing her hand, a cold sensation settled deep in his core. "Good. I would despise the notion that you were marrying me out of duty, Julia. That would be most regrettable." Turning his back, he gazed out the window, his thoughts churning like the brewing storm outside. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, that Julia was concealing something significant. He wouldn't rest until the truth surfaced, regardless of the consequences. The next morning, Harding sought out Silas, a local character known for his discretion and practicality. He discovered him at the saloon, nursing a drink at the bar. "Silas," Harding murmured, his voice laced with menace. "I have an assignment for you." Silas pivoted, his eyes narrowing as he took in Harding's grim demeanor. "I'm listening, Mr. Harding." Harding leaned closer, his voice barely audible. "I require some investigations. Someone requires watching, following." A predatory light gleamed in Silas's eyes as he grinned. "And who might that be, Mr. Harding?" "Julia Cartwright," Harding said, his tone poisoned. "And Luke Dawson, the new ranch hand." Silas's grin widened, exposing stained teeth. "Ah, the beautiful lady and the stable boy. Things are heating up." "I desire full knowledge," Harding rasped, his voice hardening. "Their every move, every interaction, every word, every look. Scrupulous discretion is paramount. My involvement must remain concealed." Silas nodded, his eyes glittering with anticipation. "Consider it handled, Mr. Harding. You'll have your answers shortly." Harding's generous payment ensured Silas's loyalty and secrecy. Leaving the saloon, Harding felt a surge of dark satisfaction. The gears were in motion. Soon, the truth would be revealed. And if his fears were validated, both Julia and Dawson would face retribution. He would not be made a fool. He would not relinquish what he considered rightfully his. His jealousy had solidified into a frigid, calculating determination. He would expose their duplicity and compel Julia to honor her commitment, one way or another. Gossip travels fast. Martha Peabody's spectacles, perched perilously on her nose, magnified eyes already sharp with curiosity as she spied from behind her parlor's lace. The Cartwright ranch, a constant source of amusement, played out across the road. Today's tableau held particular allure. A smirk played on her lips as Julia Cartwright lingered near the stables, engrossed in conversation with the new ranch hand, Dawson. More than their words, it was Julia's tilted head, the subtle bloom of her smile, that caught Martha's eye. The shared mirth, the casual brush of Julia's hand against Dawson's arm as he adjusted tack, it was all too telling. Martha inhaled sharply, a thrill zipping through her veins. Promise to Harding, and dallying with a hired hand. The nerve! Bustling from her house, her floral dress caught the afternoon breeze as she hurried toward town. News this juicy demanded an audience. First stop, Mrs. Abernathy at the general store. "You simply will not believe what I just witnessed," Martha breathed, leaning across the counter, a cloud of lavender soap preceding her. Julia Cartwright, by the stables with young Dawson. Laughing, practically canoodling, let's just say cattle prices weren't on the agenda. Mrs. Abernathy, whose own existence revolved around scales and whispers, gasped with practiced flair. "Julia Cartwright? But she's betrothed to Clarence Harding." "The poor man." "Indeed, poor man," Martha agreed, savoring the moment, though I suspect he's not entirely oblivious. "I've noticed him watching, a thundercloud gathering in those eyes of his." The gossip ignited, leaping from the general store to the butcher's, then flitting to the milliner's, each retelling embroidered with scandalous embellishments. By dusk, the town hummed with whispers of Julia Cartwright and the ranch herd. Hand? Their supposed tryst the focus of furtive glances and knowing smirks. News trickled to Jedediah Cartwright at his office. Jedediah, who prized control above all, caught wind of the murmurs through the bank manager, Mr. Henderson. Henderson, face paling, delicately broached the subject. "There have been whispers concerning Miss Julia and one of your ranch hands, Jedediah." He watched as Jedediah's complexion darkened, his eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. Cutting short the meeting, Jedediah strode from the bank, a barely leashed fury propelling him toward his ranch. The sunset blazed across the horizon, a reflection of the inferno within him. He found Julia on the porch, sketching in her notebook. "Julia," he snapped, his tone sharp as a whip crack. Julia looked up, surprised. "Father? Is something wrong?" He advanced, casting a long shadow over her. "Don't feign innocence with me, girl. I've heard the rumors. The innuendo. You and that Dawson." Julia gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "I haven't a clue what you mean." "Don't lie to me," Jedediah roared, his face inches from hers. "Do you think I'm blind? Have I not seen the way you two look at each other?" "There's nothing happening," Julia insisted, a tremor in her voice. "He's merely an employee you dedicate a considerable amount of time to," Jedediah sneered. "An employee who clearly disregards your station, your engagement." Julia rose, her spine stiffening. "Luke has been nothing but a gentleman." "A gentleman?" Jedediah's laugh was a dry, humorless rasp. "Is that what you call it? Shaming your family name? Humiliating Clarence Harding? Undermining everything I have built?" "I've done nothing to warrant shame," Julia countered, her voice gaining strength. "You dare to defy me?" Jedediah thundered, his hand raised in a threatening gesture. He checked himself, his chest heaving with rage. "You will keep your distance from that man. You will concentrate on your impending nuptials. You will not further tarnish my name or this family. Is that understood?" Julia met his gaze, defiance burning bright. "No," she stated softly, yet with a resolve that sliced through the air. "I don't understand." Jedediah's face twisted with fury. "You will obey me, Julia. You will wed Clarence Harding, and you will forget about Luke Dawson. This is not a suggestion. It is an instruction." He whirled around and stormed away, leaving Julia alone on the porch, the vibrant sunset painting long, distorted shadows around her. The burden of her father's expectations, the crushing weight of her prescribed life, pressed down on her. She glanced towards the stables, a spark of rebellion igniting in her eyes. "No," she said, resolved. She would not be a puppet. She would not be silenced. She would forge her own path, whatever the consequence. A desperate decision, the oil lamp splashed, elongated, wavering shapes across the rude walls of Luke's cramped quarters. He saturated the quill, the scrape of its nib a frantic whisper against the page. Each word was in cauterization, branding itself on his conscience. How to encapsulate the agony clawing at him. How to articulate that severance was his only shield for her. He faltered, restarted, crumpled several attempts before a tenuous thread of expression emerged. "Julia," he penned, the ink feathering slightly into the rough parchment. "When you discover this, I'll be long gone." He paused, his hand a tremor. It felt like treachery, deserting her in her hour of need, but Jedediah's ire was a cataclysm, and the town's tittle-tattle like a creeping rash, enfolding all it touched. He had to sever himself, excise the contagion before it bloomed and consumed her. He resumed, brow deeply etched in concentration. "I know this will wound you, and believe me, it's shredding me to write it. But remaining would only mire you deeper in trouble. Your father, he'll transform your life into a torment. And the townsfolk, they'll use our affair as fodder for their poisonous bonfire of conjecture. I cannot permit that. I simply won't. He squeezed his eyes shut, the vision of her face, resolute and radiant, etched in his mind. You are worthy of joy, Julia. Authentic happiness, not one coerced by obligation or responsibility. You merit someone who can stand with you, openly, proudly, without dread of consequence. That cannot be me. Not here. Not in this time. He lingered, then appended, Never believe I don't cherish you. I do. More fiercely than I ever conceived possible. But love is insufficient when shackled and suppressed by circumstance. Perhaps, in some future epoch, under a different sky, fates will align differently. Perhaps then, our paths might converge again. He signed it simply, Luke, the moniker feeling inadequate, a meager emblem of the immensity of his emotions. He folded the missive precisely, creasing each edge, seeking to trap the memory of her essence within the fibers. He knew he could not bear any mementos. It would be too perilous. He extinguished the lamp, engulfing the room in impenetrable gloom. The silence was oppressive, punctured only by the frantic drumming of his own pulse. He bundled his meager possessions into a time-worn satchel, a spare set of clothes, a blade, some biscuits, nothing to tether him to this place, to her. At the threshold, he tarried, his hand hovering on the latch. He drew one final protracted breath, attempting to saturate his lungs with the perfume of wood smoke and soil, the essence of the existence he was forsaking. He stepped into the chilled night air. The moon was a scythe in the ink-black sky, spilling elongated, spectral shadows across the prairie. He stole toward the stables, his boots crunching gently on the rocky path. The horses shifted in their stalls, their soft sighs a melancholic valediction. He extended his hand through the slats of Belle's partition, stroking her silken muzzle. "Farewell, girl," he murmured, his voice thick with sentiment. "Look after her." He moved to the adjacent stall, where a chestnut mare he had assisted in birthing last spring nudged his hand, angling for affection. He stroked her brow, feeling the gentle warmth of her breath upon his skin. Each gesture was an adieu, a silent vow he could not honor. He lingered longest with a wild mustang he was cautiously domesticating, a creature as independent and restless as he. He pressed his forehead against the horse's flank, feeling the potent muscles beneath the thick fur. "Run wild," he whispered, the phrase meant for both of them. With a final, persistent gaze, he pivoted, exiting the stables, the horse's gentle whinnies echoing behind him. He dared not turn. He simply could not. He knew if he did, he would be paralyzed, unable to proceed. He walked resolutely towards the limits of the property, towards the obscure, inviting horizon. He slipped through the gate, the metal groaning faintly in the hush of the night. He glanced back at last, the silhouette of the ranch house a murky smudge against the star-strewn sky. He envisioned Julia slumbering within, unknowing of his leaving, of the immolation he was enacting. He hoped, eventually, she would comprehend. He hoped she would absolve him. As his distance increased, the ranch blurred from view, devoured by the obscurity. He stood alone, lost in a vast, uncaring expanse. He adjusted the strap of his bag, his sight anchored on the distant peaks, their uneven contours outlined against the faint dawn sky. He possessed no itinerary, no end goal, only the nebulous hope of unearthing a place where he could obliterate, where he could surpass the specters that possessed him. He walked until the nascent sunlight daubed the horizon with streaks of rose and gold. He walked until the ranch was merely a remote memory, a wraith in the landscape of his mind. He walked until he was estranged, utterly and completely estranged, in the sweeping, unforgiving wilderness, hoping that at some point, somehow, Julia would secure the happiness he could not grant. He left the letter on her pillow. He knew Martha Peabody would be stirring early, bustling and observing. He hoped she wouldn't find it first. He hoped Julia had a few moments of peace before the storm broke. He owed her that much. He disappeared into the dawn, a shadow consumed by the immensity of the west. His soul, however, lingered behind, entombed deep within the soil of the Cartwright ranch, eternally linked to the woman he could never possess. The letter, the cheerful rays of morning felt like a taunt as they pierced Julia's window. Sleep had eluded her mind a tempest of worry. Luke's absence at breakfast, dismissed by Mrs. Henderson as a late start, ignited a chilling premonition deep within Julia's gut. She hastily donned her riding attire, her fingers clumsy with haste. She had to find him, to quell the unease that clung to her like morning mist. The stables, typically a source of solace with their earthy scents, now only fueled her dread. "Dawson around?" she inquired of Billy, a stable boy. A shake of his head was her only response. "Haven't seen him all morning, Miss Julia. Thought he was with you." The lad's carefree grin sharpened her anxiety. Forcing a smile, she thanked him and headed towards Luke's cottage, her apprehension mounting with each stride. The door stood slightly open, offering a glimpse into the shadowed interior. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed it inward. The cottage was devoid of life. More than just Luke's absence, it lacked his very essence. Gone were his meager possessions. Missing was his cherished, well-worn book. Even the lingering aroma of his pipe, usually a constant presence, had dissipated. Panic seized her. He wouldn't simply vanish without a word unless he'd been forced to. Her gaze darted around the space, desperate for an explanation. Then her eyes landed on it, a folded note on the rough table, addressed simply to Julia. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, the paper unnaturally cold to the touch. Slowly, she unfolded it, her breath hitching. The familiar, slightly slanted script filled the page. Tears blurred her vision as she began to read. "My dearest Julia, by the time you find this, I'll be gone. The thought of the pain this will cause you is unbearable. Staying is no longer an option. My presence here endangers you, threatens your future. Your father suspects our affections. I see it in his gaze, hear it in the veiled warnings. He's a powerful man, Julia, and will stop at nothing to secure your path. A path that, I know, excludes me. I love you, Julia, more than words can capture. You rekindled a light I believed extinguished, a joy I deemed unattainable. But that joy demands too steep a price. I can't allow you to compromise yourself for my sake. You deserve a life of ease, safety, and love. Someone untainted by the shadows of my past. Clarence offers that security. Julia, I cannot. Please, understand. This is the only way to protect you. Forget me, Julia. Marry Clarence. Find happiness. And remember, wherever fate may lead, I will forever cherish our shared moments. With a shattered heart, Luke. The letter slipped from her grasp, landing softly on the floor. Scalding tears coursed down her cheeks. He was gone, a sacrifice born not of indifference, but of profound love. She collapsed into the worn chair, the letter's words echoing in her soul. Protect you, sacrifice, be happy. How could joy exist without him? How could she marry Clarence when her heart belonged elsewhere? Her mind conjured an image of Luke, riding alone, his spirit as fractured as her own. She envisioned his face, the worry lines etched deeply, the perpetual sadness lurking beneath the surface. He had relinquished everything, believing it her only salvation. He was mistaken. He failed to grasp that her happiness wasn't rooted in societal standing or material comforts, but in him. It resided in his gaze, the emotions he stirred within her, the self-belief he instilled. She wouldn't allow it. She refused to let him vanish into the unknown, burdened by their love and his self-imposed sacrifice. Her father would not control her destiny. She would not be a mere pawn. A surge of defiance ignited within her, a force previously unknown. She would not resign herself to a life of quiet desperation, yearning for a love she lacked the courage to pursue. She rose, her legs shaky, but her resolve firm. Wiping away the tears, her eyes now burned with determination. A choice lay before her. She could submit to expectations, or she could claim her own joy. And for the first time, she knew what she truly desired. Leaving the discarded note as a testament to their forbidden love, she strode out of the cabin. The sun, still present, now felt different, warmer, imbued with promise. The world seemed to pause, awaiting her decision. Her steps were quick and purposeful as she headed toward the main house. Confrontation with her father was unavoidable. She would declare her refusal to marry Clarence. She would confess her love for Luke. She found him in his study, immersed in ledgers, his brow furrowed in concentration. His gaze hardened as she entered. "Julia," he stated, his tone curt. "What is it? Can't you see I'm occupied?" "I must speak with you, father," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. He sighed, setting down his pen. "Can't it wait? Important matters demand my attention." "No, it cannot," she stated, her voice gaining strength. "It concerns my betrothal to Clarence." His eyes narrowed. "What about it?" "I will not marry him," she declared, the words hanging in the air, a gauntlet thrown. Anger flushed his face. "Don't be absurd, Julia. This union is vital for our family's standing." "I don't care," she countered, her voice unwavering. "I cannot wed a man I do not love." "Love?" he scoffed. "Love is a luxury beyond your reach. This alliance is about security, about strengthening our influence." "I seek no power," she said. "I seek happiness, and Clarence cannot provide it." "You're being foolish," he said, his voice escalating. "You'll come to regret this. My regret will be far greater if I marry Clarence," she responded. "My heart belongs to another." Disbelief widened his eyes. Who is he?" After a moment of hesitation, she inhaled deeply. "It's Luke, father. I love Luke Dawson." The ensuing silence was absolute. Her father's face deepened to a shade she had never witnessed. His fists clenched, his knuckles bone white. That common ranch hand?" he sputtered, his voice choked with rage. "You dare defy me for a stable boy?" "He is more than just a ranch hand," she insisted, her voice trembling yet firm. "He is a good man, and I love him." "This is preposterous," he roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "I forbid it. You will marry Clarence, and that is final." "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible but laced with steel. "I will not." Turning, she exited the study, leaving her father speechless with fury. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: she had finally broken free. She was prepared to fight for her love, even if it meant defying her father and everything she had ever known. The battle had only just begun. Defiance, the air shimmered with the scent of savory roasts and candied fruits, an alluring facade that barely concealed the friction simmering beneath the harvest festival's cheerful veneer. Cartwright's town square vibrated with festivity. Townsfolk, arrayed in autumnal hues, milled about, their laughter echoing under the bright sky. Julia, encased in a sapphire gown that felt like a gilded prison, forced a pleasant expression as she navigated the throng, her father, Jedediah, watching her with the intensity of a hawk. Nearby, Clarence Harding, rude-faced and unsteady, loomed a constant, unwelcome specter of her predetermined future. From across the square, Martha Peabody, her features a roadmap of hard-won wisdom, locked eyes with Julia. A nearly imperceptible headshake, a silent entreaty for prudence, cut through Julia's practiced composure. Martha, practically her surrogate mother, understood the turmoil roiling within her better than anyone. "Julia, my dear," Clarence drawled, snaking an arm around her waist, his breath a pungent blend of whiskey and spice. "You're positively luminous. Truly luminous." She maintained her smile, disengaging his hand with a subtle maneuver perfected through countless encounters. "Thank you, Clarence. You flatter me." Jedediah, radiating self-satisfaction, clapped a possessive hand onto Julia's shoulder. "Clarence is a solid match, Julia. A very solid match. You'll want for nothing." The pronouncement, intended to reassure, felt like a tightening coil. Julia's painstakingly crafted mask threatened to shatter. Luke's absence resonated within her, a persistent ache no amount of forced merriment could dispel. The memory of his terse, self-sacrificing note ignited a fierce rebellion. She refused to be a mere pawn in her father's ambitions. She would not let Luke's devotion be rendered meaningless. As the town band launched into a spirited melody, Jedediah raised a hand, abruptly silencing the music. He beamed at the gathered townsfolk, chest puffed with consequence. "Friends, neighbors, I have joyous tidings to impart." He indicated Julia and Clarence, their faces illuminated by the afternoon sun. "As you all are aware, my daughter, Julia, and the esteemed Mr. Clarence Harding are betrothed, and I assure you, this union will ensure unparalleled prosperity for all." A spattering of perfunctory applause trickled through the assemblage. Nausea clenched at Julia's stomach. This was the precipice. Gathering her resolve, she stepped forward, gently deflecting her father's hand. "Father," she began, her voice trembling yet resolute, "I have something to add." Jedediah's brow furrowed, his eyes hardening. "Julia, what is the meaning of this charade?" She disregarded his question, her gaze sweeping over the faces before her. She witnessed curiosity, expectation, a touch of anxiety. She spotted Mrs. Abernathy, the town's insatiable gossip, practically vibrating with anticipation. She even discerned a fleeting trace of pity in Clarence's gaze. "I will not marry Mr. Harding," she declared, the words echoing across the suddenly silent square. A communal gasp swept through the crowd. Disbelief hung heavy in the air. Jedediah's face twisted with fury, turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Julia, what utter lunacy is this? Have you taken leave of your senses?" Clarence remained motionless, his jaw slack. a half-eaten pastry clutched in his fingers. The pity in his eyes had morphed into dumbfounded confusion. Julia stood firm, her voice gaining strength with each syllable. "I cannot wed a man I do not cherish. I refuse to live a life dictated by your aspirations, father. I am entitled to forge my own path." "You ungrateful viper!" Jedediah thundered, his voice reverberating across the square. "Do you comprehend the havoc you wreak? You're destroying everything I've strived for." "I am not destroying anything, father. I am simply seeking my own contentment," Julia countered, her voice steady. "And my contentment does not reside with Mr. Harding." He surged toward her, his eyes blazing with incandescent rage. "You will obey. You will marry Clarence, and you will safeguard our family's future. Is that understood?" Julia remained erect, her chin lifted. "No, father, I do not understand. I understand that I possess the right to chart my own course, and I choose not to wed Clarence. I choose Luke Dawson." The name resonated in the quiet, a proclamation of love and defiance. Silence descended, absolute and complete. All eyes fixated on Julia, her face flushed with emotion. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, escalating with each passing moment. Jedediah stood speechless, his face a rigid mask of disbelief and fury. He glanced from Julia to Clarence, and then back at the stunned onlookers, the full weight of his public humiliation sinking in. Clarence, shaking off his initial bewilderment, cleared his throat. A peculiar mix of relief and resignation flickered across his features. "Well, that seems pretty definitive, then," he remarked, his voice surprisingly even. He offered Julia a small, melancholy smile. "I wish you both all the best." Jedediah rounded on Clarence, his fury momentarily diverted. You're accepting this remarkably well, aren't you?" "Were you privy to this?" Clarence shrugged, avoiding Jedediah's incandescent stare. "I suspected," he confessed quietly. The admission seemed to push Jedediah past his breaking point. He seized Julia's arm, his grip vise-like. "We are leaving," he spat, dragging her toward his waiting carriage. "We will discuss this later. And you, young lady, will rue this day until your dying breath." Julia resisted, struggling against his grasp. "Release me, father. I am no longer a child." He ignored her protests, his face contorted with unadulterated rage. As he hauled her away, Julia cast a desperate glance back at the crowd, seeking a comforting face. She met Martha Peabody's eyes, her expression a blend of worry and pride. Martha offered a subtle, encouraging nod. It was enough. As the carriage careened away, leaving behind a shocked and buzzing crowd, Julia knew irrevocably that her life had been irrevocably altered. She had defied her father, rejected the yoke of societal expectation, and professed her allegiance to a man deemed forbidden. The path ahead promised hardship, yet for the first time in her existence, Julia tasted true liberation. She had claimed ownership of her destiny, and she was prepared to confront whatever consequences might arise. The battle for her own happiness had only just begun. Hunted the silence following Julia's declaration was a fragile thing, shattered instantly by the roar that ripped from Jedediah's chest. It wasn't a sound of grief, but of pure, unadulterated rage. His face, already florid from the day's heat and whiskey, deepened to a dangerous purple. Veins pulsed in his temples like frantic earthworms. "You ungrateful chit!" he bellowed, spittle flying. The carefully constructed facade of the respected landowner crumbled, revealing the tyrannical force beneath. Julia stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The warmth of her defiance, so bright moments before, flickered in the face of her father's fury. She locked her knees, refusing to yield. Martha Peabody placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, her touch a silent anchor. "You dare defy me? In front of this whole town? After everything I've done for you?" Jedediah's voice cracked with each word, a testament to the depth of his humiliation. He stabbed a thick finger in Julia's direction. "You are no daughter of mine. From this moment forward, you are disowned. Get out of my sight." The words hit Julia like a physical blow. Disowned. Cast out. The security, however suffocating, she had always known was gone. A wave of dizziness washed over her, but she clenched her jaw, refusing to show weakness. She met her father's glare with a newfound steel in her own eyes. "Then I will leave," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "And I will make a life for myself. A life you have no say in." Jedediah scoffed, a harsh, dismissive sound. He turned his back on Julia, dismissing her as if she were a bothersome insect. His attention shifted, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, settling on the faces of his ranch hands, men who had worked for him for years, their loyalty bought and paid for. "And as for that troublemaker Dawson," he spat the name like a curse. "He's a thief, a liar. He's stolen from me, and he's poisoned my daughter's mind. I want him found. Bring him to me. Alive." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a palpable tension. The smiles were gone, replaced by nervous glances and hushed whispers. They knew Jedediah's wrath. They'd seen it before. One of the ranch hands, a burly man named Hank, stepped forward, his face grim. "Where do you reckon he'd be headed, Mr. Cartwright?" "I don't care," Jedediah roared. "Find him. Scour the hills, the valleys, every damn creek bed. He can't have gotten far. And tell everyone there's a reward, a substantial one. For his capture, the promise of money was a powerful incentive." Several men nodded, their eyes gleaming with avarice. The hunt was on. Luke, unaware of the storm brewing behind him, rode hard. He'd felt the weight of Julia's gaze on his back as he left the festival, a phantom touch that both warmed and terrified him. He knew his absence would be noticed, questions would be asked. He just hadn't anticipated the speed and ferocity of Jedediah's response. He'd stopped to water his horse at a small stream, the animal drinking deeply, its flanks heaving. Luke leaned against a cottonwood tree, wiping the sweat from his brow. He should have kept going, should have put more distance between himself and Cartwright's land, but the animal needed the rest. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing Julia's face, the defiant glint in her eyes as she'd looked at him across the crowded square. It was a dangerous memory, one he shouldn't indulge in, but he couldn't help himself. The sound of approaching horses broke through his reverie. He straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung across his saddle. He didn't recognize the riders, but their purposeful gait and the grim set of their faces told him everything he needed to know. "Dawson!" Hank's voice boomed across the clearing. "Cartwright wants to see you. Come quiet, and there won't be no trouble." Luke didn't reply. He knew what Cartwright wanted. It wasn't a conversation. It was retribution. He vaulted onto his horse, spurring it forward. The animal, startled by the sudden movement, reared, then lunged into a gallop. "He's running!" Hank yelled. "Get him!" The chase was on. Luke urged his horse onward, weaving through the trees, his knowledge of the terrain his only advantage. He could hear the pounding hooves of his pursuers behind him, their shouts echoing through the hills. He risked a glance over his shoulder. There were 4 of them, spread out, trying to cut him off. He knew he couldn't outrun them on open ground. He needed cover, a place to make a stand. He steered his horse towards a rocky outcrop, a jumble of boulders and scrub brush that offered some concealment. Reaching the rocks, he dismounted quickly, tethering his horse behind the largest boulder. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard, checking the load. His hands were steady, his movements precise. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. The riders emerged from the trees, their horses snorting, their eyes narrowed. They dismounted, spreading out, their rifles raised. "Dawson, come out of there," Hank shouted. "It's over! You can't escape!" Luke didn't answer. He crouched behind the boulder, peering through a gap in the rocks. He could see Hank clearly, his rifle aimed in Luke's direction. The other men were flanking him, trying to surround him. He took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. He had to slow them down, give himself time to escape. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle shot echoed through the hills. Hank grunted, clutching his shoulder. He staggered backward, dropping his rifle. The other men yelled in surprise, diving for cover. Luke worked the lever of his rifle, ejecting the spent cartridge, loading a fresh one. He fired again, hitting another man in the leg. The ambush had bought him some time, but he knew it wouldn't last. They would regroup, come at him from all sides. He had to move. He scrambled out from behind the rocks, his rifle in hand. He ran, weaving through the trees, heading towards the dense forest that bordered the Cartwright property. He could hear the shouts of his pursuers behind him, their anger fueled by their injuries. He knew they wouldn't give up easily. Jedediah Cartwright wanted him, and he had the resources and the manpower to hunt him down. Luke Dawson was now a fugitive, running for his life, and all because of a forbidden love, a love that had ignited a war he never wanted to fight. A shot in the dark, the wind, a cruel messenger of Jedediah's fury, drove Julia and Luke westward, beyond the reach of the Cartwright dynasty. They sought sanctuary and redemption, a nascent town wrested from the harsh terrain by dreamers and exiles. Luke, now going by Dawson, secured employment gentling wild mustangs for Bess, an elderly woman whose lined face told tales of resilience. Julia, posing as a seamstress's assistant, stitched garments and patched wear, her skilled fingers finding solace in the needle's steady rhythm. A humble cabin on the town's edge became their haven, its walls offering meager protection from the elements, yet they were theirs alone. Evenings unfolded around a crackling fire, filled with shared histories and stolen kisses, a future painstakingly crafted. Julia discovered joy in the unassuming, the sharp scent of evergreens, the robust flavor of Luke's coffee, the comforting pressure of his hand in hers. In return, he appeared to shrug off the weight of his past, a nascent hope glimmering in his gaze. One scorching afternoon, Julia returned from the mercantile, a loaf of bread nestled beneath her arm. Dust devils whirled through the street, clouding visibility, but she recognized the figure lounging against the hitching post outside their cabin. Clarence Harding, his face contorted with barely leashed rage. He spat, the globule landing on the dusty earth as she approached. "Running off with a nobody, Julia? Is this your idea of familial respect?" Julia straightened, her spirit unbowed. "I respect myself, Clarence. A concept beyond your grasp." Clarence's eyes narrowed to slits. "Father wields considerable power. He won't tolerate this." He gestured vaguely toward the surrounding timber. "And your lover? He'll pay dearly for daring to touch what belongs to me." Luke emerged from the cabin, his expression granite. He moved with quiet authority, the affable ranch hand replaced by a man versed in defending himself. "She doesn't belong to you, Clarence. Never did." Clarence scoffed. "Think you can shield her? You're less than nothing." "Then try to make something of it," Luke retorted, his voice a low growl. Tension thickened the air. Julia felt Clarence's animosity radiate outwards like the heat of a kiln. He reached inside his coat, and a chilling certainty washed over Julia. He hadn't come to parley. "Don't, Clarence!" she screamed, but her plea arrived too late. Clarence produced a revolver, leveling it at Luke. Instinct took over. Julia hurled herself forward, knocking Luke aside. The gunshot reverberated, disrupting the tranquility. A jolt of searing agony erupted in Julia's shoulder. She faltered, and Luke caught her as she began to fall. "Julia!" he cried, his voice ragged with terror. He eased her to the ground, his hands blooming crimson. Clarence remained paralyzed, his face drained of color. The sharp report of the firearm attracted onlookers. People streamed from the saloons and shops, their faces a tableau of curiosity and alarm. Sheriff Brody, a stout man with a weather-beaten face and knowing eyes, forced his way through the gathering crowd, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "What's all this commotion?" he bellowed, his voice cutting through the noise. Luke, cradling Julia in his arms, looked up at the sheriff, his eyes blazing with fury. "He shot her! That man shot Julia!" Sheriff Brody's gaze swept over to Clarence, who stood speechless, the pistol still clutched in his hand. Brody's jaw hardened. "Clarence Harding, you're under arrest for attempted murder." Clarence sputtered. But she's a person, Harding." Brody interrupted, his voice steely. "And you attempted to end her life." He signaled to two deputies, who promptly disarmed Clarence and escorted him away. Luke, oblivious to the gathering, remained fixated on Julia. Her face had paled to ivory, her breaths shallow and ragged. "Stay with me, Julia. Just hold on," he murmured, pressing his hand against the wound in a desperate attempt to staunch the flow. He carried her into the cabin, laying her carefully on the bed. Bess, the horse breeder, arrived with a somber expression and a satchel laden with bandages and poultices. She issued brisk instructions, her rough exterior concealing a surprising tenderness. The ensuing days bled together in a haze of pain and feverish hallucinations for Julia. Luke remained vigilantly by her side, tending her fever, whispering words of hope, and directing prayers heavenward to a deity he struggled to believe in. He watched her, his core wrung with a dread he had never experienced. He had glimpsed happiness with her, and the prospect of losing her was insurmountable. As Julia inched toward recovery, the story of the shooting spread through the town like a prairie fire. Jedediah Cartwright arrived, his face thunderous. He demanded an audience with his daughter, but Sheriff Brody stood his ground. "She refuses to see you, Cartwright," Brody stated, his voice unwavering. "And considering your man's actions, I'm disinclined to force the matter." Jedediah erupted in a storm of threats, lawsuits, and promises of political retribution, but Brody remained steadfast. Ultimately, defeated and humiliated, Jedediah departed redemption, his formidable influence rendered impotent by Julia's unbreakable will and the town's unified disdain. Word eventually reached Julia that Jedediah had been apprehended, not for the shooting, but for a litany of financial misdeeds and abuses of power that had finally caught up with him. The empire he had erected on fear and intimidation was collapsing. With Jedediah's downfall, the shadow that had loomed over them for so long began to fade. Julia and Luke chose to make redemption their permanent home. The town, initially a haven, had evolved into a true home. They purchased a modest ranch on the outskirts, raising livestock and horses. The labor was demanding, yet deeply fulfilling. Years unfolded. Julia and Luke forged a life brimming with affection and joy. They raised children, their own tight-knit family born from defiance and profound devotion. Julia never forgot the sacrifices Luke had made for her, the dangers he had faced. And Luke never forgot the woman who had chosen him, who had defied her father and convention to be with him. Seated on their porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the western sky in vibrant colors, Julia leaned into Luke, her hand resting gently on his. "We did it, didn't we?" she murmured. Luke smiled, his eyes reflecting the molten light. "We did. We found our redemption."